Welcome to Positive Perspectives, a podcast dedicated to sharing powerful stories that presents opportunities to grow from lived experiences. Each episode, we speak to expert guests who bring thought-provoking topics, meaningful lessons, or stories that spark transformation and deeper understanding. Today, I'm speaking to Professor Laura Serrant, CBE, a multi-award-winning speaker, thought leader, independent consultant and coach. Also an author with over 100 articles. She's one of the BBC's expert women and was named as the 8th most influential Black person in Britain by the UK. Laura, welcome. Welcome to Positive Perspectives.
Thank you, Marie, and thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a bit more about yourself and what you're going to be sharing today?
Just to add to that is, I originally qualified as a nurse back in 1986, and throughout my career, I've worked, I suppose, straddling both within higher education, within policy work, and within healthcare service provision. But the thing that unites the work that I have together is really about equity and equal chance, and working out how can we make sure that everyone has an equal chance of good outcomes, good experiences, and access to the resources that we have in health and care or in education.
Thank you. So you studied as a nurse, that's quite interesting. And where you are now looking at equity and resourcing everyone so that they have
Yeah,
equity in their environment, in their own organization, and professionally.
yeah. I think the thing is as well, there are two sides to this. When we think about equity and we think about social justice, it's easy to think about it in a kind of structural way, as in that it's something that organizations do or that systems do or things that happen outside of us as human beings. But actually, there's a lot of it around our own agency in that space, which probably we'll come on to. And the leadership element of that is about not just how we lead other people or lead our work or lead the things that we have responsibility for, but also how we lead ourselves and how we embody and how we evidence our commitment to that through not just what we do, but how we actually choose to lead.
I'm curious about that whole piece around leading self, because we almost, when we think of leaders, we think of it in, as you were saying, in the professional environment, but we lead ourselves first.
Yeah, we do, absolutely. And I think that, that's the bit that we don't always consciously think about, because often we think about leadership in terms of a role. So therefore linked to a job or a job title or a position or something that's expected of us. But in that we do our own leadership or our self-leadership every day in the decisions we make, the things that we choose to do, but also things we choose not to do, and how we choose to present ourselves and how we choose to be in any workspace. But we don't always see it as that. We just see it as making a decision or this is how I do it or whatever. But it's important that we actually recognize that as self-leadership, because once we recognize it as a role and a responsibility and something that we have a choice in for ourselves, we're less likely to see ourselves as victims of whatever is going on or the world or other people, and more likely to see that we have agency and we have choice in that kind of space as well.
That's a very powerful insight. Thank you for that. So, talking about this journey that you've been on, it'd be great to hear where you started.
As I said, I've said at the beginning, I started in terms of being trained as a nurse in the 1980s, but way before that, kind of being brought up as many people were in quite a poor area of the city. One of the things that always struck me through school, etc., was that many of the families, the parents, the people who lived, not just in my own family, but friends and on the street, etc., they had worse health. So people seemed sicker than some of the families that I met through school, friends and other people I connected with. And my interest was about how does that come about? How is it that we're all living in the same city, we're all living in the same space, and yet some people have a better or worse outcome than someone else? And that kind of led into working within healthcare. And I suppose when I qualified in 1986, for those people who are at least as old as me, or maybe, not too much younger, will may remember that in the UK, that was the height of the AIDS pandemic. And that was also which was the first huge national pandemic of unknown cause that we had for quite a while. And again, as a nurse working out in the community during the AIDS pandemic, that was replicated again. So, for example, there was a belief that certainly early on, that only certain groups of people were susceptible to the AIDS infection and death. And so those five risk groups, as they call them, were kind of labeled as, kind of the cause of the pandemic, and also people to be feared and be avoided. So they didn't have equal access to services, to care, to information. That impacted on broadly more than just their health. It affected them. People lost their jobs. Some people had their houses firebombed. People were refused mortgages. Whole range of things happened during that time. And what struck me was that this is what happens when you get that overlay of unequal treatment, fear that people have, quite rightly, because they're reading on the news that people are dying from unknown cause. People are being told that this group of people are the ones that are the cause of the infection, and people are afraid. So when you get fear and information or lack of information, and then there's something that actually is life limiting or life ending, that whole perfect storm occurs in which injustice, inequity, how people are treated, and the damage of them, not just to the person, but to their broader community, or if it all comes into play. So it was from then that I really, really took on finding out, okay, what can we do? What can we do to actually try to create systems and processes and structures where people will have an equal chance of getting the right information, of receiving the right care, and having the same or at least an equitable experience. So that's where it all comes from. And what I observed in a lot of that time was it wasn't just about the policy and the law, it's around through leadership, how leaders actually saw their role in that space. So sometimes they didn't make decisions based on fact or evidence or what would create the greatest good, but actually that was also based on fear. So leaders themselves were not in any way protected from having the same fears and the same worries about their own health and their own wellness in that space. And that affected the decisions they made. But what that rolled down to, that it then affected how people were treated, it affected who got access to care, it affected how people were treated during the final journeys of their life as well, and then what impact that had on their families. It was a real time of learning that health, individual health, is an individual person or family's concern, but at certain times where the systems, where society, and where the information isn't accurate or isn't kind of shared in an informed way, that rolls out to have an impact on all society. We saw it again in COVID. COVID was just the next, the similar things we saw in the 80s were the similar things we saw in COVID. An unknown virus, something that we didn't know what caused it at the beginning, something that that took a lot of people's lives, and something that was unknown and hidden, unseen, and something that was talked about in the news every day, constantly, and affected people's everyday work. We had lockdown, we had, the 2 meter rule, we had people being afraid whether there'd be enough food to go around. So we had that hoarding behavior. We had all the behaviors that we had in the AIDS pandemic. And if you look back at pandemics across the world, flu pandemics, potato famine blight in Ireland years ago, all these things that go beyond more than 2 or 3 countries, they have similar kind of patterns. the hysteria and the fear actually affects how people act in their everyday.
Mm.
And
And
so my work is really have been about how do we help leaders in that space and people to lead themselves in spaces where things aren't kind of sure, where they're not known, where there may be challenges, to actually try to make sure that we give everybody an equal chance, as I said, of a good outcome, a good experience, and at least access to the resources that there are.
mm. So when you were talking about the leaders and you were talking about their decisions that they make and how it impacted on others,
Mhm.
I was also comparing or curious about the modeling, because the behavior that they're modeling gives permission to others to actually
Exactly.
replicate that as well, which is quite dangerous.
It is, and that, as I said, was the thing that was I saw in the 80s and we saw going forward. So um, that's why in my first point I said people often see leadership as something that's aligned to a role or a job or a title. But actually, for me, leadership is about not what we do, but how we do what we do and the impact that it has. And what is the intention around our decision making? If we only see it as doing the job or making sure the tasks get done or holding people to account, that is kind of something almost like outside of ourselves. What it doesn't do is engage with the human part of who we are.
Mm.
Um, and interestingly, you were talking about the kind of frameworking and over the 40 years since I've been working in this area, and certainly over the last 20 years since I did, that drove me to do my research work and my PhD work was about finding, okay, how can we frame what this leadership looks like? How can we frame this leadership which has at its heart human integrity, but actually delivers business impact? Because ultimately, no matter how authentic or nice or engaged we are as a leader, ultimately our effectiveness is judged by the impact that we have. So we have to be able to deliver whatever that business is. And when I use the word term business, it might be paid or unpaid. It might be public service. It might be within a corporate setting. But what is the impact that we want to have in our leadership? Kind of what is it working towards? How does, if you're in a business, ultimately, whatever division or whatever area you're leading is in competition with other areas as well. You have to justify the investment that's made in you, whether that's financial or not. And you also have to be able to evidence that what you're doing is producing the outcomes that the organization, the business, or yourself want. So this was kind of my thinking around that right back from 2004 when I first did my PhD, and that was looking at what is the essence of this leadership, what is the essence of the thing that is driving, and at that time it was around the AIDS pandemic and around sexual health at that time. What is the essence of makes a difference between how we make decisions in that space with everything else and all the noise that's going on? How do we recognize and actually be able to see the impact of all that negative energy, all that injustice, how the impact that has on people, on communities, and on how healthcare or education or services received. And out of that, I developed a concept called screening silencers, and that was in 2004. And then, so that's fundamentally the thing at the center of this. And screening silencers are about areas of experience or information or policy which are kind of lived. People, so in the everyday, people live it and they know it, they feel it, they see it, it happens. But if you go to the formal references, should we say, so the formal bits of information that we use to set policy or to decide on business resources or to decide on where we're going to put our efforts, you won't see evidence of it there because it lives in people's everyday experiences. but it's not necessarily there in the papers and the information that we use to help us make business judgments.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's such a loud noise in people's everyday experience, but completely silent in what counts as information.
Yeah.
And then, so that was in 2004. And then from that, postdoctorally, it took me to 2010 to actually develop a framework around that concept so that other people, whether they're looking at service improvement, whether they're looking at leadership, whether they're looking at doing research or policy, or a framework people could use to help guide their thinking around this. And that was published in 2010, and that was called the Silencers Framework. And that's been used internationally, and that's probably the basis of a lot of the publications that you talked about. It's been used in lots of places around the world. And then when I moved into working independently in business, in consultancy, etc., I used that framework as the base of my business framework model. And that's the model that's around the Lioness Effect and Lioness leadership, which is what we're doing now. And the strange thing was I was looking for something in our real world now that actually lifted the framework from being like a theoretical, because that's a theoretical framework, to a practical framework that could be used by leaders in leadership roles and by organizations in a business set. And the closest thing that I found in the natural world, that the imagery that reflected or embodied, should I say, that leadership that's around based on integrity that delivers impact, is the natural instincts and the ways of the lioness in the wild, and hence why it's called the Lioness Effect. Because how the lioness leads and how she does her role is always intentional. And it's based on a clear integrity of knowing herself and her role within the pride, but actually delivering the impact that's required, not just for herself, but for all. So although you've got the lion as the king of the jungle, so to speak, it's the lionesses who predominantly do the hunting. It's the lionesses who basically nurture the rest of the tribe and ensure that the lion, who has, again, a very specific role, it's not about being over, it's about clear integrity in their space, make sure that the lion gets the rest needed in order they can enact their role when they do their role very clearly. And so the original concept, the theoretical framework, and now the Lioness Effect basically comes down to 4 pillars of work around how we lead with integrity and deliver business impact, which I call the 4 Bs, right? And the first one is be you. So that's about leading as yourself. So actually, the things that often we get told when we move into leadership roles is that there is one way of doing it. And actually, there are obviously well-proven things that help, tools and things that you can use as a leader. But ultimately, you can only lead as yourself. And the things that your experiences, all the things that have brought you to this point in your life, are actually part of the power, the thing that gives you the difference. So it's about harnessing your own clear identity of self as a leader, including for yourself, and then being able to use that alongside other tools, etc., of what works for you. Because you can't just cut and paste a load, lots of training says we all do the same training, but different tools work better for different people. So that's about you developing your sense of you and you as a leader. So be you. The second B is about be human, and that's about the allowing, or should I say, gifting yourself the opportunity to make mistakes, to not know the answer, to get things wrong, but to actually learn as you evolve. And with leadership, it's often one of the things that we do very openly and easily for other people, but we don't do for ourselves. We hold ourselves to levels of scrutiny that we would not necessarily do for other people. And the humanity makes us recognize that we don't just arrive as a leader on day one, even on the first day of the job. And in fact, in most people's experience, and certainly mine, you get promoted into leadership because you're a very good professional in a practical sense of what you do, but you then get promoted into a job that you're not being prepared for.
Yeah.
So it takes a while for you to think, oh, all of a sudden I'm in charge and now I really don't know what I'm doing. So you're consciously incompetent, as they say, when you start. So that being human is really, really important to you. And again, as you'd said previously, you talked about leaders um, showing and demonstrating the behaviors, not just for their leadership, but also what that tells other people that it's okay to be or to do. So that's part of that being human bit. The third part of the structure is be intentional and consistent. And that's where the choice comes into. Choice comes there, but also a clear sense of where you're going with this. If we don't have a sense of where we're going and to what end we're doing this work, or to what end we're making these efforts, or to what end we're investing in this type of resource, all that happens is that we end up doing tasks. A really good friend of mine, been friends for many, many years, and she herself does a lot of work in reverse mentoring, for example. And she said a phrase to me, gosh, it must be about 15 years ago, which I always remember. And although she was talking about nurses, to me, it's very clear. And what she said is that we have to move away from selling our labor to commercializing our knowledge. And that's the difference. The difference is that when we sell our labor, we're just focused on doing the task, getting paid to do the task, 20 boxes. Okay. But actually, the greatest asset that we have is the experiences that we have, what we know, and our intentionality around that. So it's about knowing where you're going, where you are on that journey at any point, because that helps you then decide what you're not going to do, which is so important because in lots of leadership roles and work, the jobs are infinite. Leadership has no end or beginning. Business ownership's the same. The
Yeah.
job is infinite. So you have to create that intentionality around that. And that's how you evidence the type and the integrity of your leadership. It's what you do every day or choose not to do that makes a difference. And the final pillar in the four is be connected. And that is about who we connect with, how we connect, how we make those, business connections or those organizational connections. Because none of us, the nature of humanity, and like the lioness in the pride, we're not unilateral people. None of us got here because we on our own were so fabulous that we did everything ourselves.
Mm.
You know, we drove our own way, but on the way, there are people have helped us. Sometimes they helped us because they were supportive, and sometimes they helped us because they were not. But because of all those experiences, they brought us to this place. But when you step into a leadership role, whether it's leading yourself, leading other people, leading a business, leading an organization, or leading a project even, you will need other people in order to deliver the impact. And some of those people will be about the actual work, and some of those people will be about keeping you well in that space, holding you to account, asking you if you're okay, making sure that you have that critical connection or that critical questioning. Because one of the things we know is the higher you get up in a leadership role, the less people ask you questions. And it's, you need to think about what are the connections and how do you connect?
Mm.
Because if you don't keep your connections going, business wise, it dies off. Leadership wise, you get forgotten and left. And you're much more likely to burn out when you're on your own than when you are in a network. So they're the four B's. Be
Yeah.
you, be human, be intentional and consistent, and be connected. And that is basically the framework of self-leadership as well as leadership that has integrity and delivery of impact at its heart.
Wow, I'm just kind of reeling from all that information because it seems so pertinent to leadership, and you frame those pillars in such a way that they work, they're understandable, and there's something that you can use in your daily sort of
Mhm.
processes and how you work and how you choose to work. And that was a great the great thought you had there that you were saying about what you choose to do and what you don't choose to do, because sometimes leaders may feel that they don't have a choice, because
Hmm.
as you were talking about tasks, we're on this treadmill of tasks, get it done, get this done, get that done, and whatever's being put on our plate is almost what we do,
Yeah,
without choices. But that's very interesting that you were talking about, well, you do have a choice and you don't need to do that.
yeah. I mean, let me give you a kind of example that people listening to um, may kind of be familiar with or may remember themselves. You know, the Lioness Effect and the work around that is you'll see the outcome of 40 plus years of experience. But here's a good example. One of the things I used to do when I first became a manager and first moved into a leadership role, particularly because it was always so busy, is I used to, on a Sunday night, I used to check my emails on a Sunday night, believing that what I was doing was making sure I was prepared for Monday to make it easier for Monday morning. What I've learned is it doesn't make it easier for Monday morning. All it does is ruin your Sunday night. Because in that infinite world of leadership, I never ever, no matter how many emails I looked at and dealt with Sunday night, I never turned up at work on Monday morning and there were no emails.
Mm.
You know, the emails just kept coming. So actually, you know, all I did was just, you know, take a half a day off my weekend. So I stopped doing it and just thought, I'm going to deal with it 8 o'clock or 8:30 on Monday morning when I'm going to look at them. And guess what? Made no difference. Nobody said to me, why haven't you looked at your emails? And then I did something else. And the other thing that I did was stop looking at my email after a certain time at night. So after 6, I never answered any. And again, the world didn't end.
And
So it is about when we talk about the things you choose not to do, nobody was telling me to check my emails on Sunday night. It wasn't in my contract. It wasn't something everybody did it, so I did it. But actually, when I decided I wasn't doing it anymore, it made no difference.
what's quite interesting about what you're saying is really just simplifying what you're doing.
Mm.
But sometimes because we're in pressurized environments, we we maybe start to challenge our own values because we want to deliver those results. But how do you think integrity and your impact can coexist in these pressurized environments?
I mean, that's kind of the reason why I've got the 4 pillars I talked about. Do you remember that I said right at the beginning that, you know, the roots of this for me comes from observing what happens in a pandemic. And in a pandemic, what happens is that something starts small and some people start behaving in a certain way, and then everybody basically jumps on the bandwagon and it becomes a hysterical action. And hysteria is fundamentally where, you know, crowds of people act in an irrational way over something. Pressurized environment is it's important to stop and think, okay, why are we doing this? Is there actually a directive that says we all need to do this? Or is it just that everybody does it, so I'm doing it as well? Okay. And I think that's where the integrity comes because, you know, even integrity is about acting with intentionality and also about acting in line with the values that you have. Okay. So if, for example, you're in an organization or you yourself believe in the value, let's say, of people having a private life or having downtime or remaining well or taking time out or taking their holidays and all those things which are about keeping us well as human beings, okay, if that is the case, are you then also putting up with people answering their email, coming at meetings when they're supposed to be on leave? That's not an integrous action because it's not in line that, you know, the thing that you're saying is not in line with what you're doing or what you're allowing to happen or enabling to happen in your space. So this is a simple check around integrity. Is what I'm doing and how I am leading myself as well as my team, is that not in line with my values and in line with organizational values or the strategic intent or what I fundamentally believe is right? And sometimes you actually have to stop, save people from themselves. One of the things in my team is that, I say to people quite clearly, if you're on leave, you are on leave. The other part of that is if I'm on leave and I've briefed somebody to oversee or anything that's live that needs to be dealt with, and then I then keep popping back in, there's an unwritten sentence that says, I don't trust you, Marie, to actually do this work. I've left you in charge, but I actually don't think you can do it.
Yeah.
Because I think if I'm not there, it won't be done right. So integrity is that alignment between what you say you're going to do and the actions that you actually take, and how you showcase that leadership to everybody else. Because what it's saying to everybody else is, well, she might say, take your time off, but really, we've still got to check.
Yeah. And so many light bulbs are going off as you were speaking, that for leaders that I've coached, for situations that I've been in as
Mm,
well, that those patterns can persist regardless.
mm.
The actions speak louder than words, if you like. But that's very interesting. Maybe to understand, for us to understand what patterns you see those leaders who can sustain both sort of credibility and influence over time. What patterns have you seen?
I've seen, as I said, I've seen the one thing is that they're very clear on, everyone's clear about what kind of leads they are, how they lead, what their expectations are. And that also people are clear that they're also very human, like I've said before, that they can make mistakes. If they make mistakes, they'll hold their hand up to it. If they don't know, they'll say, I really don't know. And the integrity is also about, you have a great team of people often that you work with or work with you or for you. And because of them, the whole organization or the department or the division or the business succeeds. But as a leader, if when I'm giving a report, I speak as if I'm the one that's done everything, that's not very integrous either. So I actually openly, one of the things I think good leaders do is in public, they praise and recognize the people who do the work as well. And the other thing is, I think with the leaders who are able to sustain that balance is when I talked about intentionality and consistency, that not only do they know where they're heading and what they're doing, but actually the team knows as well. Everybody knows where we're being led to. And they also create spaces where people in the team can come up with alternative ideas or suggestions. Because again, the human part of us should recognize that we don't hold all the answers and that someone actually, we don't know what we don't know. If we go back to the screaming silence bit, somebody's experience might tell them something or they know something which I have not experienced myself. So it would never occur to me to do that.
Mm.
So creating those spaces where you can have those different voices, where you can get that input, and giving people the recognition of that contribution is really important.
Yeah, definitely. Integrity to become a leader's anchor rather than an afterthought. What
Yeah.
do you think will shift in most organizations quickly?
I think the thing that shifts it the quickest. Do you mean what will shift in it when it's recognized, or do you think how will we know the difference?
When it's recognized.
When it's recognized, I think it's that whole thing about the humanity bit. We see that leadership isn't kind of seen as embodying a role or something that comes, once you've got the name on the door or the badge on the lapel, then for you're it. But actually allows people time to move into those spaces, but also recognizes that even when you might have been in there for 20, 30 years, that doesn't mean that you're not going to make a mistake and that things aren't going to happen. And I think when you have that within an organization, it means that the organization sees and values the humanity in everybody. And that is, because we can only predict so many things in business, but ultimately, every day we're dealing with people. So even with all the experience, with all the knowledge, with all the 40 odd years except I've got now, how you meet me today may be different to tomorrow. And that's because of my humanity. And it means I'll work better one day or worse another day. And when organizations recognize that, what they're able to do is actually flex and give people the space that they need. So they get people bring the best of themselves to the work, not all of themselves to work, because sometimes you don't want to bring all of yourself to work, but they bring the best of themselves, the best they have today. And that's really what you see.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for that, Laura. As we're coming to a close, it would be great for you to let us know one positive takeaway that you'd like to leave with our audience.
I think we've talked a lot about humanity and integrity and delivering impact, but I think the three things that I would say in terms of leading yourself or leading other people, start from where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. And that's it.
It's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that your leadership journey and your experience and the way you framed it, the Lioness Effect, absolutely amazing. But the way you framed this is quite simple and doable and great a framework for people to and leaders to take forward, both in their personal and professional lives. Thank you
Yeah,
so much.
thank you. And thank you for the chance to speak with you.
Thank you.